Can I tell you something I love about you? Well, I'm gonna, so. You don't just take a message that I say on this stage and then kind of, all right, thanks for that. Pastor, good message. Have a good week. No, you wrestle with it. You go home and you try to live that in your life. Last week, David's story taught us that when everything and everyone seems against us, lean on the one who's never left you. And then this week, as I was going through my week and I got to connect with a few of you, I heard story after story of how you're trying to apply that in your lives. In difficult family strains, with others who have caused deep hurt in your life, and you're trying to figure out how to forgive them as you wait for test results and on surgeries, and as you have decisions that are going to affect you and the ramifications for your future. You don't even know what that's going to be like. But tell me if you're like me at all. Do you ever wish you could just have one day off from being the nice guy or girl? Like 6 days a week, I will do the David. When things are against me, I'll trust you, God. But Jesus, I know you told me, turn the other cheek. But my cheeks feel bruised as peaches right now. And I just want one day where I don't have to do the right thing. Now, I know we're in church, or some of you are listening online and you're like, is this a church service? Is he allowed to be talking about this? I know, it's a little taboo to say these things, but do you ever feel that, like the 100th time that somebody hurts you and you say, I forgive you, I know you hurt me, I know you're sorry, it's okay. You ever wish like the 100th time it happened, that's the time that you could just unload on them with how you really feel? Like, today is the day, I'm sending the angry text. And you tell them what you really think of the situation, and you use exclamation marks and caps lock and angry emojis. Oh, that felt good to just take a day off from doing the right thing. I'll be honest, I try to make that my policy. Confession time. It's been a season of transition at our house. There's been more than one day lately where I've been a bear, and the girls have been like, is there rooms in the house where Daddy or Andrew's not going to be around? It's happened in my life, and if it's never happened in your life, well, then I don't have much for you today, I'll be honest. But if you can admit that sometimes we feel this way, would it encourage you to know that even King David felt this from time to time? The first 2 weeks of our series, we have highlighted David's heroics. So he slays the giant. He takes out the Philistines. He's Israel's savior. And then the next week, Saul is persecuting him, and David just perseveres. He just keeps trusting in the Lord. But don't be mistaken. Even though there are some heroics of David, our Old Testament hero, he wasn't a superhuman. He had moments in his life where he was just ready to snap. Open your Bibles to 1 Samuel 25. 1 Samuel 25, that's where we're going to be today. And I would encourage you, if you're new to Calvary and you don't know how this works, or you're watching online, please follow along in your own copy of the Bible, because I want you to see I'm not making this story up. This really happened in David's life. And I would even encourage you to go a step further and take notes if you have a notepad or on your phone, your device, because as things stand out to you, or there's passages you want to look up, or concepts you want to keep thinking about, jot them down. It's a way that we're able to learn. But in 1 Samuel 25, after years of running from Saul, David is spent. And he's having a bad day. And a guy who just not the brightest guy decides to be difficult. And he picked the wrong day to cross David. See, here's the danger of reacting impulsively when we're mistreated. When you and I overreact today, it has consequences for tomorrow. When we overreact today, there are consequences tomorrow. And so how do we ensure that today's decisions don't become tomorrow's regrets? That's what we want to find out from 1 Samuel 25. And the hero of the story will teach us this. And spoiler alert, the hero today is not David. Let me introduce you to some of the major players. Verse 2 of chapter 25 says, a certain man in Mon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. So, first character in our story, Nabal. Verse 3 tells us that he was loaded, he was a hard man, and he was mean. Later on in the story, we're going to find out that his name means fool. Now, that's probably, I don't know a mother that would give their son the name fool. It's probably a play on his name, a nickname, like in school, you introduce yourself. Hi, my name's Donnie. Did you say donkey? That's a little bit probably how Nabal's name started. Oh, Nabal, like fool, okay. Now let me just give you a little tidbit about the Bible. Whenever an author in the Bible introduces somebody's character as poor before they've even started doing anything in the story, you know their story's headed downhill, okay? Look out for it. But Nabal is married to Abigail, who we learn is beautiful on the inside and the outside. Now, young guys in the room, if you find a girl who is not just pretty, but she's also smart and godly, marry that girl. Okay, maybe buy her a pop first and get to know her, but then marry that girl. This story is just one of those classic cases of a guy who married way out of his league. Heard one guy call it Beauty and the Beast, the original. But Abigail, in all seriousness, she lived what some of the spouses in this room and watching with us online have faced. A spouse who does not have the capability to love anybody but themselves. And over time, being that selfish and that hard and that difficult, they just become mean and intolerable. This is Abigail's situation. But we'll come back to that because there's one more character I want to introduce you to in the story. You guessed it, it's David. Remember, he's on the run from Saul. We went all the way around this story last week. He's living in the wilderness from cave to cave. Verse 4, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it's sheep shearing season. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you, therefore, be favorable toward my men. Since we come at a festive time, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited. So if you don't really get what's going on in the story because you're just like, what happens in ancient Israel, that's okay. But in those days, it wasn't uncommon for people to have this unwritten working arrangement. So David's on the run. He's got 600 trained, skilled soldiers, and they become mercenaries. They just help out the locals, protect them from the bad guys, from wild animals, things like this. David just took on that role because he had some hired muscle. And what was normal in those days is for the people who owned the land, who had the livestock, to just, when the season was right, when it was sheep shearing season, that's a holy cow, I'm not going to say that again, but when that season came upon them, they would pay up. It's a little bit like, so I've told you before, my parents owned a meat shop when I was growing up, and my dad had a guy for everything. Oh, a little electrical work needs done. Oh, this repair. We got this going on with the vehicles. Somebody comes in, takes care of the problem for us, and then my dad cuts up a couple of nice steaks. A little trade-off, an informal relationship where you pay back your IOUs. And so David, the season comes upon them, and Nabal realizes, wow, it was quite a good season, 3,000 sheep. And David says, hey, don't forget that favor I did you. But Nabal doesn't get the memo. Look at verse 10. Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Well, that tells you he knows who this David is. He's being a punk. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why would I take my bread and water and the meat I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? Nabal had a God complex. Me, myself, I built this fortune. And so David, just like last week, just like when Saul persecutes him, he patiently endures and does the right thing. Right? No. Verse 12. David's men turned around and went back, and when they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did. And David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. That's what we call a slight overreaction. Whatever the reason, David's obviously having a bad day. They're probably exhausted. Your whole life is on the run for years. Obviously, these guys were hangry. You've been hangry before? That messes with you. And so their tempers flare. What about you? When things are stacked against you, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're hungry, when you're hurt, when you're overwhelmed, how do you respond? Because how we handle that decision today, it's going to affect tomorrow. Trust me. When you're at your limit and then somebody decides that they're going to just push you over it, how do you respond? We always have excuses, and we can tell the people around us, we can justify and logically explain why this was the most reasonable choice. But rarely when it's all said and done, do you come out looking good, do you? So David straps on his sword. A servant is watching this whole thing, just jaw on the ground, like, oh no. Runs to Abigail, verse 14. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us. The whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He's such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Those of us who are managers, directors, bosses in the room, imagine that's how your employees talked around the water cooler. Abigail acted quickly. She loads up like 5 sheep, 60 pounds of food, in addition to all sorts of skins of wine and cakes of raisin and pressed figs. She loads it all up on a donkey. She goes to meet David, and the whole time, David is having a little, when you're so angry that you just start talking to yourself and you sound a little bit like a, crazy person? Well, this is David, verse 21. He'd just been saying, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." You want to see a master class in the art of negotiation? Watch Abigail. This is where I want to zone in, because Abigail crushes it. Verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming you, my Lord, be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away from the pocket of a sling." And now David's reminding him, oh yeah, that's how God works. "And when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Ladies, men are not that complicated. A little food, mix in some flattery, problem's gone. Okay. So Abigail does more than that, but man, guys are funny, hey? Watch this ninja mind kick that Abigail lands on David. First she predicts in verse 26, David, you're not going to do it. I know you're not going to do it. And she tells him the future, this mind ninja kick. God will keep you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself. Like she knows that's what's going to happen. And then she pulls this one. Remember, David, you only fight the Lord's battles, right? In other words, is this really the Lord's battle? Is this the one you want to do? Remember, David, come on, buddy, do the right thing. Now, I don't know if it's something in our psychological makeup as guys. Maybe we're going to have to ask Lori when she does her class, The Ultimate Architect, in a couple of weeks. But there's just something about us. Maybe it's reverse psychology, or maybe it's the power of a beautiful and intelligent woman. But something just triggers us, and we become like puppets. Like my wife will be sitting at home at night, and she'll be like, I think I want a cup of tea. I'm going to go downstairs and make a cup of tea. And something in me is like, hey, I got it, honey. Sometimes. Or she'll be on her way out the door, and it's like, hey, don't you worry about the trash. I've got the trash when I get home. And it's like, challenge accepted. I'm on it. I will get the trash done. What is it that makes guys work this way? But honestly, Abigail does more than just ninja mind tricks. And if you have an angry person in your life, or if you're ever around angry people and you want to know how to stop them from doing something they regret, you got to do the Abigail. So what she actually does is she starts with humility. First of all, she's the lady of the land. This is one of the richest guys, Nabal. She's married to him. She's the lady of the land. And she gets off her donkey and right away bows and shows humility. Then, how many times did she call David Lord and she called herself a servant? She shows humility. And then secondly, she accepts responsibility. She doesn't just go making excuses. She doesn't pass the blame. She says, yes, I know Nabal's a fool, but he's my fool, okay? And I'm sorry for what he's done. She wasn't even there, but she takes it on herself. And then she doesn't go attacking David. She doesn't go like, why are you being so, you're such an immature guy. You're acting like a child. No, she doesn't do that. She speaks to his character. She calls out the good in David. She says, I know you're not about wrongdoing. This isn't you, David, so don't do it. And then lastly, she speaks to David's potential. Did you see it in verse 28 and verse 29? Go back there with me. It says, please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away from the pocket of the sling. David, I know you're going to be king one day. I know that you're going to be king. And then the next two verses are possibly what makes Abigail the most brilliant woman in the Bible. Verse 30 and 31, when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. She's saying, David, when this has all been said and done and you are finally king, do you really want on your conscience this bloodshed? Do you want to have a murder on your rap? You don't need to do this. This isn't what the future king would do. And David, well, he grants Abigail's request, verse 32. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come out quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive at daybreak." And then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request." The story's not over yet. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. And then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. He had a stroke. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So Nabal here lives out the meaning of his name. The Bible tells us that a fool says in his or her heart, there is no God. And Nabal lived his life as if he was his own God. And other people were just pawns in his story. It's a privilege to serve me, to be my slave. I'm God's gift to this world. The world revolves around me, doesn't it? Do you know people like this? And Nabal lives out the meaning of his name, and he pays for it. But David recognizes how God used Abigail to save him from a huge mistake. Verse 39, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing on his own head." And then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. Jump down to the end of the story, verse 42. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. And David and Abigail lived happily ever after. Well, not quite. That's actually probably the start of David's next biggest issue. But we're not going to get into that one today. Today, what I want to focus on is that this week, all of us are going to make decisions. Some of them are going to feel mundane, simple. Others of them are going to be very difficult decisions. And then you add the fact that you're going to be tired. There'll be times this week when you're hungry, you'll be hurt, you'll be stressed, you'll be overwhelmed. And as I asked earlier, how will you respond? We can't control our circumstances, but we can always control our response. We can always control the way that we respond. And Abigail's line speaks straight into our lives in these situations. Verse 30 and 31, I love how the New Living Translation says it. When the Lord has done all he promised and has made you the leader of Israel, don't let this blemish be on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. I heard Andy Stanley say it a few years ago, and I just couldn't think of a better way to say it, but it's as if Abigail is saying to David, when this story is nothing but a story that you tell, what story do you want to tell? When this is nothing but a story that you tell, what story do you want to tell? When your grandchildren ask about this time in your life, this thing you're going through right now, what do you want to tell them about the way you handled it? When you're past this rough patch in your marriage, and now you're celebrating your 25th anniversary, how do you want to tell the story of how you got there? When this friend group, or living at home, or being a student, when you're 10 years down the road, and maybe you have a new friend group, or maybe some of those friends are still around, what do you want to tell your friends about the way that you handled this situation? When this is nothing but a story that you tell, what story do you want to tell? That's the question of this passage. And once you can answer that question, well, the solution is simple. Do whatever it takes to tell the story you want to tell. Don't repay evil with evil, as David intended to do. Repay evil with good. Besides, when is the last time repaying evil for evil did any good? Like sometimes we think if we just get even with somebody, then we'll be all good. Well, no, it's been said that an eye for an eye just makes us all blind. That's not going to help the situation. Imagine what your life, what our church, what our world would be like if we all took Abigail's advice. But don't just imagine, because if you are listening today and you are calling yourself a Jesus follower, then this is not a nice to do, it's a must for you. Jesus said, a servant isn't greater than his master, and I came to serve. I came to live this way, and so I expect that you'll live this way. He also said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's what you've heard? No, I say don't resist an evil person, but turn the other cheek. They say, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. No, I say, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Oh, Jesus. That's tough. And granted, he's God. So of course Jesus could do it. Well, not necessarily. He was also fully human, right? And when he came to earth, he still had to make a choice every single day to not repay evil with evil. He had to choose good. He was fully human, and he had many opportunities. When people were aggravating him, when he spent all night awake, he didn't have a chance to sleep, and then Peter was there. Oh my goodness. Could you imagine being Peter's mentor? Oh, woo! And every single time, Jesus chooses to do the right thing. He chooses obedience to his Father. You know why? Because Jesus knew what story he was writing. And he knew it was too good of a story to put a blemish in it by reacting the wrong way. His story was going to be written down in history. It's what we call the gospel, the good news about how God sent his son to prove his love and to save us from our sins. Jesus knew this story was being written with his life, and that it would get translated into hundreds of thousands of languages, and billions of people would read that story. He knew this was coming. And so the next time you're tempted, and it's probably even going to happen this week, to take a day off from being the good guy or the good girl, remember the words of Hebrews 12 as they describe Jesus. Hebrews 12 says, I got the Message version here, keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. That exhilarating finish in and with God, he could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor right alongside God. And when you find yourself flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility he plowed through, that'll shoot adrenaline into your souls. This week, we're starting our life groups, and oh, baby, it's that time of year where I get to talk about it every single week. Some of our life groups are starting, and they're going to do sermon-based, and we're just going to start with the story of David. And so far, we've met Saul, we've met Nabal, and I want you to think about this question. Who's the Saul in your life? That person who's just constantly making your life difficult, and really, there's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck with that situation. Or who's the Nabal in your life? That person who is just a pain to you, but you could get even if you wanted to. It's within your means, it's within your power. And then here's the really important question. What would it look like to take Abigail's advice? What would it look like to repay evil with good? What story will your life tell? Don't let today's decisions be tomorrow's regrets.